The herbal residue won't scrub off. My mother-in-law's smile sharpens as I hide the last clean bottle behind my back. Leo's breath is shallow, too slow, and my husband just handed Evelyn another vial of poison. The bathroom lock clicks behind me, but the phone in my pocket buzzes with proof. They're not trying to help. They're trying to replace me. The scent of scorched rosemary and something metallic stung Sarah's nostrils. She leaned over the sink, her knuckles white as she gripped the bottle brush. A stubborn, yellowish film clung to the plastic rim of Leo's favorite nipple. She shoved the bristles deep, twisting until the plastic screeched against the porcelain. Hot water scalded her wrists, turning the skin a blotchy pink, but the residue refused to budge. The steam rising from the basin felt heavy, carrying a bitter, medicinal tang that didn't belong in a kitchen. Evelyn leaned against the doorframe, her silk robe whispering against the wood. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, radiating a cold, expectant stillness. Sarah glanced at the counter where the open canister of organic supplements sat. A fine, bitter dust coated the marble around it, looking like ground-up bone. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She knew that smell. It was the same cloying, earthy aroma that had been lingering on Leo's breath for days, a scent that made her stomach churn with a primal, protective dread. "The colic seems worse today," Evelyn said. Her voice carried a rhythmic, rehearsed sympathy, as smooth and artificial as polished glass. Sarah's chest tightened. She rinsed the bottle, watching the bubbles swirl down the drain, but the sharp odor of the herbs remained, defiant and oily. She picked up a fresh nipple, squeezing the silicone between her thumb and forefinger. A single drop of dark, viscous liquid oozed from the hole. It wasn't milk. It was thick, like syrup, and stained the clear plastic with a jaundiced hue. "I washed these an hour ago," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking like dry parchment. Evelyn stepped into the light of the kitchen pendant, the shadows stretching her features into a sharp, predatory mask. She reached out, her manicured fingers plucking a clean bottle from the drying rack. The diamond on her ring caught the light, flashing a cold, blue spark. Hygiene is a delicate balance, Sarah. Some things require a mother's touch to truly disappear. Sarah gripped the edge of the basin. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, a low-frequency vibration that rattled her teeth and made the very floor feel unstable. Across the hall, in the darkened nursery, Leo began a thin, jagged wail. It wasn't the robust cry of a hungry infant. It was a weak, rhythmic sound, a mechanical whimper that signaled a deep, unnatural exhaustion. Evelyn didn't flinch. She simply smiled, her eyes tracking the frantic pulse in Sarah's throat. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and shared meals, had become a laboratory of quiet terrors. Sarah looked at the bottle in Evelyn's hand and felt a wave of nausea. Every instinct she possessed screamed that her son was being systematically dulled, his bright eyes turning glassy under the weight of his grandmother's care. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing the tattered edges of her small notebook. She needed to record this. Entry 3413. Failed to protect the milk. Allowed the bitterness to enter. Later that evening, the house settled into a heavy, artificial silence. The walls of the Miller estate seemed to lean inward, thick with the smell of old wood and Evelyn's omnipresent chamomile. Sarah sat on the floor of the nursery, the floorboards cold beneath her thighs. She moved with the surgical precision of a ghost, prying up the loose plank beneath the rocking chair. Inside the dark hollow, she tucked away a fresh, sealed bottle of formula she'd managed to smuggle in from the grocery store 3 days ago. Her hands shook as she smoothed the wood back into place. This was her secret supply chain, a desperate hoard against the slow poisoning happening in the kitchen. She pulled her notebook from her waistband, the scratch of her pen against the paper sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. Leo, lethargic, eyes unresponsive to the rattle. Sleep lasted 6 hours without waking for a feed. Evelyn's tea administered at 4 p.m. She looked at her son. Leo lay in the crib, his small chest rising and falling in a shallow, drugged rhythm. He began to hum, a low, dissonant two-note drone that vibrated in the air. It was a sound that broke Sarah's heart, a physiological response to the sedatives that Evelyn insisted were just calming herbs. Sarah leaned over the crib, her hair falling like a curtain around her face. She breathed in his scent, trying to find the milky, sweet smell of a healthy baby beneath the cloying layer of crushed rosemary. "I'm here, Leo," she whispered, her voice a mere vibration. "I'm watching. I'm writing it all down." She felt the weight of the house above her, the 3 stories of stone and secrets, and wondered if her small notebook was enough of a shield against the woman downstairs who counted the stairs as she walked. The front door, heavy oak door, groaned on its hinges, announcing David's return. Sarah heard the rhythmic thud-thud of his briefcase hitting the hallway floor. She tucked the notebook away and hurried to the top of the stairs. She needed him to see. She needed her husband to be the man he was at the office, decisive, sharp, protective. She found him in the living room, standing by the fireplace while Evelyn adjusted his tie. The scene was so domestic, so perfectly curated, that for a moment Sarah doubted her own eyes. "David," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Leo isn't waking up properly. The bottles, there's something in them. Your mother's putting things in the milk." David didn't look up. He stared at the mantel clock, his jaw clenched so tight that the muscles pulsed. "Sarah, we've talked about this. The doctor said the postpartum transition would be hard on your nerves." "It's not my nerves." Sarah stepped into the room, the plush carpet muffling her footsteps, but not her desperation. "Smell the bottles, David. It's bitter. It's medicinal." He's humming in his sleep. Babies don't do that. David finally turned, but his eyes were vacant, looking through her rather than at her. "We think you're overthinking the routine, Sarah. Mother has decades of experience. We need to trust the process. You're exhausted. You're seeing shadows where there are only lights." Evelyn smoothed the lapel of David's suit, her touch possessive. "It's the lack of sleep, darling. It creates a certain imaginative instability. We should probably increase the dosage of your own supplements, Sarah. You look quite peaked." The use of the royal we from David's mouth felt like a physical blow to Sarah's chest. He wasn't her husband in this room. He was an extension of the woman standing behind him. He was a ghost inhabiting a suit, speaking with his mother's tongue. Sarah backed away, her heart cold. She realized then that she wasn't just fighting a mother-in-law, she was fighting a monolithic unit that had already decided she was the problem. Subverted. The next morning, the sun struggled to pierce the thick gray clouds over the suburban Maryland streets. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline, a sharp, cold clarity that tasted like copper. She had waited for this moment. David was in the shower, the steam muffling the sound of the world, and Evelyn was in the garden, her back turned as she clipped lavender. Sarah grabbed her purse and Leo's car seat. She didn't need a suitcase, she just needed the baby and the keys. She would drive to the pediatrician in the city, the one Evelyn hated. She would get a blood test. She would get the proof that would shatter this house of cards. Her logic was sound. A medical professional couldn't be gaslit. A lab report didn't care about family traditions. She made it to the mudroom, her breath coming in short, jagged gasps. The keys were hanging on the brass hook. Her fingers closed around the cold metal, the fob for the SUV, the key to her freedom. She could already feel the hum of the engine, the wind through the window, the safety of the open road. Relief washed over her, a warm tide that made her knees weak. She had outsmarted them. She was a good mother. She was saving her son. She turned to the door, a smile starting to form on her lips. When the door didn't just open, it was blocked. Evelyn was standing there. She wasn't in the garden. She was right in front of the glass, her face inches from the pane. She didn't look angry. She looked disappointed, the way one looks at a pet that hasn't learned a simple trick. "Where are we going, Sarah?" Evelyn asked, her voice muffled by the heavy wood but still vibrating with authority. "He needs a checkup," Sarah said, her voice rising in a frantic pitch. "Move, Evelyn. I'm leaving." Sarah tried to push past, but Evelyn's hand shot out, gripping Sarah's wrist with a strength that belied her age. The older woman's fingers felt like iron bands, cold and unyielding. In the scuffle, Sarah's purse fell, spilling her notebook and her phone across the linoleum. Sarah lunged for the phone, but Evelyn kicked it away, her eyes never leaving Sarah's. "You're not well, dear. We can't let you drive in this state," Evelyn whispered. Sarah screamed, a raw, guttural sound, and shoved Evelyn with all her might. In the chaos, as they grappled in the narrow hallway, Sarah's hand brushed against Evelyn's pocket. She felt the rectangular weight of a phone, not her own, but Evelyn's. With a desperate clawing motion, Sarah snatched it and bolted toward the stairs. She scrambled into the guest bathroom, slamming the heavy door and sliding the bolt just as David's heavy footsteps thudded in the hall. Her heart was a drum, her lungs burning. She looked at Evelyn's phone. It was unlocked. A notification sat on the screen, a message from an unsaved number. Sarah's eyes blurred as she read, "The lactation induction protocol is ready. Ensure the subject remains sedated for the final phase." The supplements David ordered arrived at the office. The world tilted. Sarah slumped against the cold tile of the bathtub. She had the proof. She had the smoking gun. David wasn't just ignoring the abuse. He was the financier. He was buying the chemicals to turn his own mother into a surrogate for his son. She felt a grim sense of victory. They couldn't deny this. But then, she heard David's voice through the door, calm and terrifyingly steady. "Sarah, I know you took Mother's phone. I saw you on the hall camera, and I see what you're looking at." "I have the messages, David," she yelled, her voice echoing off the marble. "I know what you're buying. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," David said, and she could hear the smirk in his voice. "Call them. Show them the proof. I've already sent the logs of your search history to Dr. Eris. The part where you were researching how to forge medical texts and create fake text threads. I told him you were having a break from reality, trying to frame us because you feel replaced by the baby. Who do you think they'll believe? The successful lawyer and his pillar of the community mother, or the woman who's been documented as unstable for weeks?" Sarah looked at the phone in her hand. The screen flickered. Suddenly, the message she was looking at vanished. The screen wiped blank, a remote command deleting the evidence before her very eyes. She tapped the glass frantically, but it was gone. She hadn't found a way out. She had walked into a trap that used her very attempt at rebellion as evidence of her madness. She was holding a stolen phone with no evidence on it, locked in a bathroom, while her husband called the authorities to report her violent episode. She hadn't won. She had just handed them the handcuffs. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. Sarah sat on the edge of the tub, the cold marble biting into her skin. She heard the heavy, metallic clack of the front door being locked from the outside. Then, a new sound, the rhythmic, screeching turn of a screwdriver against wood. She walked to the bathroom door and pressed her ear against the grain. From the nursery across the hall, she heard the distinct, heavy slide of a metal bolt being drilled into the exterior of the door frame. David was sealing her in. "We think it's best if you stay in here for a while, Sarah." David's voice drifted through the wood, muffled and distant. "Just until the episode passes. We'll bring Leo in to see you once you've calmed down. But for now, we need to ensure the house remains tidy." Sarah slumped to the floor. She looked at the vanity mirror. Her reflection looked back, wild-eyed, hair matted with sweat. A woman who looked exactly like the psychotic mother David was describing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her small notebook. Her fingers trembled as she clicked her pen. Entry 3414. "I tried to run. I failed. My son is alone with them. I am the villain in their story now." The smell of bleach began to waft under the door. Someone was cleaning the hallway, scrubbing away the scuff marks from the struggle, erasing the physical evidence of her resistance. Hours bled into a singular, gray haze. Sarah paced the small confines of the room. She checked the window, but it was a solid pane of reinforced glass, the kind used in high-end security homes. No latches, no way to break it without a sledgehammer. She felt the walls closing in, the ceiling descending. She turned to the small vanity cabinet, searching for anything. A weapon? A tool? Amidst the spare rolls of toilet paper and expensive soaps, her hand hit something cold and metallic. She pulled it out. It was her breast pump, the one Evelyn had insisted on cleaning for her. Sarah looked at the plastic shielding. Embedded deep within the silicone flange, hidden just behind the rim where it would meet her skin, was a tiny, jagged sliver of a razor blade. It was positioned so that the suction of the machine would draw her flesh directly onto the edge. A cold shiver raced down her spine. This wasn't just about sedation anymore. This was about physical erasure. Evelyn wanted her to stop nursing, not just through drugs, but through pain, through mutilation. She dropped the pump into the trash can, the plastic clattering against the metal. She looked at the walls. The childhood photos she had brought with her, the ones of her father, the ones of her graduation, were gone. In their place, someone had hung a large, ornate frame containing a black and white portrait of Evelyn as a young woman. Evelyn's eyes in the photo seemed to follow Sarah, a silent paper ghost claiming the space. The isolation was a physical weight. Sarah found herself counting the tiles on the floor, mirroring the counting she heard from Evelyn in the hallway. 1, 2, 3. She caught herself and stopped, her heart racing. She was becoming part of the house. She was being absorbed. She needed to move. She needed to know the truth. Late that night, when the house breathed with the slow, heavy snores of David in the master bedroom, Sarah used a bobby pin to pick the simple privacy lock on the bathroom door. It took her an hour, her fingers cramping in the dark. But finally, the bolt clicked. She crept into the hallway. The air smelled of lavender and floor wax. She bypassed the nursery. The new bolt was massive, a silver scar on the wood, and headed for David's office. The room was a shrine to order. She sat at his desk, her heart thumping in her ears. She began to go through the drawers. Most were locked, but she found a hidden catch behind the leather desk blotter. A shallow drawer slid open. Inside wasn't her passport or the legal documents she expected. It was a leather-bound ledger, the edges frayed and yellowed with age. Sarah opened it. The handwriting inside was cramped and precise, Evelyn's hand. Sarah's eyes scanned the pages, and the blood drained from her face. It wasn't a diary. It was a log. May 14th, 1992. The subject is resisting the rosemary tincture. Increased the dosage. The mother is becoming increasingly confused. In front of the neighbors, David is responding well to the surrogate bond. June 2nd, 1992. The mother has been removed. The transition is complete. I am the only source of life he recognizes now. The house is quiet. Asterisk. Sarah flipped the pages, her breath coming in shallow hitches. There were photos tucked into the back. A young woman, beautiful and smiling, holding a baby David. Then, a series of photos of the same woman looking haggard, gray. And finally, a newspaper clipping. Local mother committed to state asylum after violent breakdown. Evelyn wasn't David's mother. She was a shadow that had stepped into a grieving home, a wet nurse who had used the same herbs, the same gaslighting, the same isolation to steal a life. And now, 30 years later, she was doing it again. She was a parasite that lived in the cycles of other people's families. It's a beautiful system, isn't it? The voice came from the doorway. Sarah froze. Evelyn stood there, silhouetted by the hall light, her silver hair glowing like a halo of barbed wire. History doesn't repeat, Sarah. It rhymes, Evelyn said, stepping into the room. She didn't look angry. She looked proud. David doesn't remember her. He only remembers the smell of rosemary and the sound of my voice. And soon, Leo will only remember me. You are a temporary necessity, a vessel that has outlived its purpose. You're a monster, Sarah whispered, clutching the ledger to her chest. I am a preserver, Evelyn countered. I keep the foundation strong. The baptism is tomorrow, Sarah. Once the water touches his head, the legal papers David signed will move you to a very quiet place where you can write in your little notebook all day long. And I will give Leo the life he deserves. A life of perfect, controlled peace. Evelyn stepped forward, her hand outstretched. Give me the book, dear. It's time to go back to your room. Sarah looked at the ledger, then at the woman who had stolen a generation. She felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in months. Not fear, not guilt, anger. A hot, roaring fire that burned through the fog of the sedatives. No, Sarah said. She didn't apologize. She didn't look at the floor. She tucked the ledger under her arm and bolted for the door. She didn't head for the stairs. She headed for the laundry room on the second floor. She knew the layout. She knew where she'd hidden her small victories. She slammed the laundry room door and locked it. Her hands flew to the back of the dryer, where she had taped a small, high-potency bottle of caffeine pills she'd swiped from Jennifer weeks ago. She swallowed two, the bitter chalkiness a welcome sting. She needed to stay awake. She needed to fight the sleep that Evelyn was trying to weave around her. The next morning, the house was a hive of activity. Sarah could hear the muffled sounds of caterers, the clink of silverware, the low murmur of voices. The baptism, the deadline. She was allowed out of her room under David's watchful eye. She moved like a doll, her eyes downcast, playing the part of the broken woman. She sat in the kitchen, sipping the tea Evelyn provided, while her heart raced from the caffeine pills. She was vibrating with a hidden energy. A delivery driver arrived with a crate of flowers. Sarah saw her chance. As the man passed her to set the lilies on the counter, she slipped a folded piece of paper into the pocket of his high-visibility vest. Help. Drugged. Call police. Miller Estate. She watched him walk away, her heart soaring. This was it. The outside world was coming. She just had to wait. 10 minutes later, the front door opened. The driver returned, but he wasn't alone. He was walking with David, his hand on David's shoulder. "Found this in my pocket, Mr. Miller," the driver said, his voice thick with a local, church-going accent. "Thought you should know. Your wife seems, well, like you said, very confused." David took the note, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Sarah and tore the paper into tiny, white flakes. Kindness moment. The afternoon sun began to dip, casting long skeletal shadows across the lawn. Sarah was being led back toward the stairs when she saw Mr. Henderson, the gardener, struggling near the rose bushes. He had tripped over a coil of hose, his old knees hitting the gravel with a sickening crunch. His face was twisted in pain, and a spray of blood dappled the white stones. David kept walking, his hand firm on Sarah's elbow. "Ignore him. He's clumsy. We have a schedule to keep." Sarah stopped. The pressure of David's grip increased, but she didn't budge. She looked at Mr. Henderson, a man who had helped imprison her, a man who had carried her back into the house like a piece of wayward luggage. He looked small. He looked human. "He's hurting, David," Sarah said. "It's not our concern." Sarah wrenched her arm free. It was the first time she had used physical force against him without a plan, without a goal. She ran to the gardener. The smell of damp earth and iron hung in the air. Mr. Henderson's hands were shaking, his calloused skin torn and embedded with grit. Sarah knelt in the dirt, ignoring the stains on her silk dress. "Don't move," she whispered. She took the lace handkerchief from her sleeve, the one Evelyn had given her for the ceremony, and pressed it firmly against the wound on his leg. The gardener looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise. You shouldn't be out here, Mrs. Miller." "Hush," Sarah said. She used her hands to clear the gravel away, her fingers gentle but firm. She could feel the warmth of his blood, the pulse of his fear. For a moment, the roles were reversed. She wasn't the victim. She was the one with the power to heal. She stayed with him for 5 minutes, ignoring David's barking orders from the porch. She helped him sit up. She fetched a bottle of water from the outdoor cooler, and she made sure he could stand. "Why?" the gardener asked, his voice cracking. "I didn't help you. I brought you back." Sarah looked him in the eye. "Because I know what it feels like to be broken and ignored. No one should have to feel that, Gary. Not even you." She walked back to David, her head held high. She had lost 5 minutes of her escape window. She had likely made David even angrier. But as she passed the gardener, she felt a strange, quiet strength. She hadn't just helped a man. She had reclaimed her own humanity in a house that was trying to turn her into a ghost. The evening of the baptism arrived like a funeral. The house was filled with people, members of Evelyn's congregation, David's law partners, the witnesses to Sarah's decline. They looked at her with pity, their whispers like the rustle of dry leaves. Sarah was kept in the nursery, the door bolted. She could hear the music starting downstairs, a slow, liturgical hum. Then she heard it, the sound of Leo crying, truly crying, not the hum, but a sharp, pained scream. She lunged for the door, but it was locked. She threw herself against the wood, her shoulders screaming in protest. Through the gap in the door, she saw Evelyn. The older woman was sitting in the rocking chair, her back to the door. She was holding Leo, and she was unbuttoning her blouse. "There, there, little one," Evelyn cooed, her voice a low, vibrating drone. "The mother is gone. The source is here. Drink of the rosemary. Drink of the peace." Sarah's vision went red. The sedatives, the caffeine, the months of fear. It all coalesced into a single, white-hot point of maternal rage. She looked around the room. Her eyes landed on the heavy, wooden diaper caddy filled with glass jars of lotions and powders. She grabbed it. She didn't think. She didn't apologize. She smashed the caddy against the door's hinges. Once, twice. The wood splintered. On the third strike, the bolt gave way with a metallic snap. She burst into the room. Evelyn turned, her face a mask of shock. But Sarah didn't stop. She swung the caddy with the strength of a woman who had nothing left to lose. It hit Evelyn's shoulder, a dull thud, followed by the shatter of glass jars. Evelyn fell back, screaming, and Leo tumbled onto the soft rug. Sarah scooped him up, her heart roaring. "Don't you touch him!" Sarah screamed. "Don't you ever touch my son again!" David burst into the room, his face purple with rage. He saw Evelyn on the floor, the broken glass, the blood on Sarah's dress from the gardener. "Look at you!" David shouted, his voice carrying down the stairs to the waiting guests. "You've finally done it. You've lost your mind. Everyone, come see. Come see the mother you're so worried about." He grabbed Sarah's hair, dragging her toward the stairs. She fought, she bit, she clawed, but he was stronger. He threw her into the attic, the small, cramped space above the master bedroom. "Stay here and rot," David hissed. "The baptism is starting, and when it's over, the ambulance will be here to take you to your new home." The lock clicked. Sarah was alone in the dark, but David had forgotten one thing. Sarah wasn't just a mother. She was a woman who had lived in this house for 5 years. She was the one who had set up the smart home system when they first moved in. She crawled to the corner of the attic, behind a stack of old suitcases. There, tucked into a hidden niche, was her old tablet, the one she'd told David she'd lost months ago. It was plugged into a trickle charger, its screen glowing with the interface of the house's security network. Her fingers flew across the glass. She didn't need protocols or encryption. She just needed the share button. She accessed the nursery camera. She accessed the recording from 5 minutes ago, the struggle, Evelyn's attempt to nurse, David's violent dragging of her across the hall. She looked at the guest list on the digital calendar. She selected every contact, every law partner, every church member, every local news tip line she had preloaded. 1, 2, 3. Sarah whispered, mirroring Evelyn's count. She hit send. Downstairs, the music stopped. Suddenly, 50 phones chimed in unison, a chorus of digital pings that drowned out the liturgical hum. Sarah watched the live feed from the living room. She saw the guests pull out their phones. She saw their faces go pale. She saw David's boss, a senior partner at the firm, look at the screen, then look at David with a mask of pure horror. Sarah didn't wait for the police. She used the tablet to trigger the emergency release on the attic door, a fire safety feature she had programmed herself. She ran down the stairs. The guests parted for her like the Red Sea. They didn't see a confused mother. They saw a survivor. She walked straight to the baptismal font where Evelyn was holding Leo, trying to continue the ceremony. Sarah grabbed the ornate silver pitcher of holy water. She smelled it. Rosemary, sedatives. She poured the water onto the floor. "The ceremony is over," Sarah said. her voice calm and cold as a winter lake. She took Leo from Evelyn's limp arms. The older woman looked shrunken, her power evaporated by the light of the digital truth. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, a rising, rhythmic shriek that signaled the end of the Miller era. 3 months later, the sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a small, secure apartment in the city. There was no rosemary here, no lavender, just the smell of fresh coffee and the clean, sweet scent of a baby. Sarah sat in a rocking chair, a new one, made of light pine that didn't creak. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The sunken eyes were gone. Her skin was warm. She looked like a woman who had walked through fire and come out tempered, not burned. Leo sat on the rug, playing with a set of wooden blocks. He didn't hum anymore. He babbled. He laughed. He reached for her with chubby, healthy arms. Sarah picked up her notebook. She looked at the thousands of apologies, the ledger of her own perceived sins. She took a deep breath and tore the pages out, one by one. She didn't need to apologize for taking up space. She didn't need to say sorry for protecting her life. She watched the sun rise over the city skyline, the light turning the buildings into pillars of gold. She was the foundation now. And this time, it was built on the truth. She picked up Leo and held him close, his heart beating against hers, a steady, natural rhythm that no one would ever break again. "We're okay, Leo," she whispered. And for the first time in her life, she didn't mean the royal we. She meant her and her son, two souls, finally separate and finally free.